Most of you should know who I am or have seen me around St. Francis. I'm Deacon Chuck Hoppy, and I'm actually the deacon that's actually assigned to two parishes. But tonight, compliments of an online survey that you all took, I guess, at the beginning of the year, as opposed to going with a canned lesson plan. We went through the responses of that online survey, and we chose the topics that we're going to talk about over the next 4 weeks based on the results of that survey. So first thing I'll say is very well done, because you did very, very well as a collective group on the survey. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I apologize. I'm going to assume we all know how to use the guides down at the bottom of the Zoom screen. Under reactions, if you select that, there's a raise your hand feature. I'm going to ask you, please ask questions as we go. But I'd ask you to please raise your hand so I can see it. Right now, there's just enough of us that you all fit on my one screen, so I don't have to bounce back and forth. And I have Miss Nikki to help me keep an eye out. So, and keep me straight. How many people, by a show of hands, did not download the material that Miss Diane sent earlier? Well, that's excellent. So everybody saw the stuff. Good. All right. I'm not planning to push slides. And Miss Nikki, I don't know if that's what they normally do or not. Do they normally push slides?
I think last year's class, when it was in person, was more of a conversation, but I think you're fine if you would like to do it that way.
No, I'd like to have a conversation, but I want them to have the material too. So I see a nice picture of Frank there, but I don't see Frank's face. And Cynthia looks like she's still in the dark too. But anyway.
If you have not unmuted your camera, you need to unmute your camera, please. And make sure your camera is pointing at you, not the ceiling. There are several people, I only see the top of your head. If you can adjust your camera, we would appreciate it.
Over the next 4 weeks, so tonight, the 18th of January, the 25th of January, and the last class with me will be the 1st of February. We're going to go over a number of topics. It's basically 2 topics a night. And we're going to use two primary references, but Miss Diane is going to make the copies of the things that are pertinent, and she's going to put them out to the class, hopefully a day or two ahead of time so you have a chance to look at it, because we're going to go through some things. If you've not seen this is a book called The UCAT, and it basically is a youth catechism. It is a condensed version written very specifically for young teens that kind of synthesizes what's in the canonical document, or the document of reference for the church, which is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. So this is basically written for you all. This is written for folks like me and Miss Nikki. So we're going to use both of those references. Okay. And of course, the last reference is, of course, the Bible. So I don't know if you all keep them handy or not, but we will be going through a couple of things earlier. Now, how many of you know, let me restart. Vocabulary. So vocabulary, that's not true. Language in general. When you start thinking about language, how many pieces, how many components of a language might you think of? How many can you think of that make up a language? What do you have to know a language? Anybody? Anybody? Somebody? You see, this is the thing about how, there we go. I see Lauren. But Lauren, do you know how to raise your hand in Zoom? Down at the bottom of the Zoom window, if you move the mouse, there's a thing called reactions. And down inside reactions, if you select that, there's a raise your hand. It looks like something like that. Okay, don't have to do it. But Lauren, please unmute yourself. What would you tell me what is the components of language?
Grammar and pronunciation.
I'm sorry?
Grammar and pronunciation.
Okay, grammar, pronunciation. Anybody else? Anybody know another language? I can tell you that, for example, in Spanish, all of the adjectives that describe a noun come after the noun. That's not necessarily true in English. So sentence structure is another one of those things that we talk about when we talk about language. And then what might be another piece? Anybody? I kind of gave it away at first. All right. So vocabulary is important. Who can give me a profession where they have their own vocabulary? I'm sorry, did you say geometry?
The military.
Oh, the military. Thank you. I agree. Military. Who else?
Yeah, like
Priya, thank you.
medicine, like doctors and nurses.
Yep, doctors and nurses, medical. Anybody else? You two actually had the two I had written down. I just wanted to see if anybody had anything else. Engineers tend to have their own language depending upon their discipline. Electrical engineers, different than structural engineers. Sometimes even people who do trade jobs. So people who work with woodworking or work with plumbing, they all have their own language. And sometimes it's for their own shorthand so they can communicate rather quickly. But it's also so they can communicate very specifically. So that when they say something to somebody, they know exactly and can agree exactly on what they are saying. We as Catholics, we have our own vocabulary as well. And so part of this discussion is about, you really can't have a good conversation about your faith if you don't know the language of your faith. And I'm not talking about learning Latin. I'm talking about learning the words. And when you hear a word, you know what they mean. Because sometimes we'll hear a word over and over, or you'll hear an adult talking, an older person like me talking about grace. And if you don't understand what grace is, it's very hard to, one, communicate about it, and two, it's hard to explain it. So that we're going to have that in the background of everything that we do. Now, there's two ways that I can assess how well you all are getting the information. I can get feedback from you. So thank you for those that are participating already. Or I can do it the old school way and I can give a quiz. So really kind of the choice is yours. I prefer to just have feedback, but I am prepared to give Father Jack's quiz. And if you haven't remembered, if you haven't talked to me from previous years, Father Jack did have a quiz, and this is basically, I inherited his class when he moved on. So I prefer not to do that. I'd like to just give you that information later for your own use, but that's going to depend on you all. You all need to participate. Okay? See a lot of stares. All right. I'm going to try something here. All right. So the list of things that we're going to do over the next couple of weeks. Tonight, we're going to talk about two subjects. We're going to talk about moral virtue and theological virtues. What are they? Don't answer yet. We're going to get to that. And then we're going to talk about sanctifying and actual grace, because they are two different things. And you need to understand those two things before we really get into some of the other ones. Next week, we're going to talk about sin and your conscience, our conscience, and then this concept called conversion. On the 25th, we're going to talk about types of prayers. Probably didn't realize there were types of prayers. And then this concept that we profess every Sunday called the communion of the saints. And then the last class is we're going to talk about the 10 commandments and it's those commandments in respect to the great commandment. And if everything goes according to plan, that's it. If not, that will be the day that we take the quiz. When we talk about virtues, we have to have a conversation about virtues and morals before we talk about anything else. So when we say morals, what are we talking about? When we say morals, what do we mean? Anybody? It's going to be a long night. Morals.
Like personal beliefs.
Is it Frank?
That's Nick.
No, I'm sorry. Okay, Nick, thank you. Personal beliefs. Frank, you have your hand up.
Yeah, like things that you go by.
Things that you go by, foundational things that you guide your life by. Okay, anybody else? Merriam-Webster says this: morals often describe one's particular values concerning what is right and what is wrong. So when we start talking about our morals, we're talking about those criteria that we use to determine whether or not we think something is right or something is wrong. So what is a virtue? You can guess. Honestly, you got to be courageous here. It's okay not to know. What is a virtue? Well, again, Miriam, okay, who we got there? I see a hand in the middle. Is that Robert Blankenship?
Something that others want you to do?
No, I don't know. Normally that's an expectation, right? Somebody places an expectation on you to do something because their morals and your morals may not line up. But I'll give you a hint. Your virtues are normally aligned and informed by your morals.
Positive trait or value.
Okay, so you said positive traits. They don't always have to be positive, by the way. But virtues are the things that we conform ourselves to, right? So it's a standard by which we claim we're going to live by. So we have our morals, which kind of guide us to say, here's what's right and here's what's wrong. But then we'll say, from that, we will set a standard. And some people have varying standards before they say, you know what, that's bad. It's okay until you get to this point and then it's bad. Or if you really think somebody's doing something really, really nice all the time, or they have this trait, as one of you said, and they exhibit that all the time, you may use that as your measuring bar for whether or not you think what you're doing is right or wrong or good or bad. So the morals tell us which direction we're going. The virtues kind of tell us, are we making the grade or not? Okay. But virtues are also something normally that we're passionate about. Who has passions? What are your passions out there? I saw somebody maybe in year 2. He kept popping up the Van Halen screen. But who has a passion? What do you love? What do you really love to do? Katie?
I like cooking.
Okay. Who else? Come on, nobody has any passions? No music lovers? No.
Looks like Nick has a hand up.
Nick?
I like basketball.
Okay, basketball. Who else?
And if you're not comfortable saying it out loud, if you want to put it into the chat, we can also see it.
So what happens? A passion normally drives you to do something that you enjoy doing. Can we agree on that? All right. So what happens when your passion completely consumes your behavior? What happens? What do we call it? Or what do you think? Is it a good thing or a bad thing when your passions start to drive your behavior constantly? Good thing? Bad thing? Bad thing. All right. Starting to communicate here. This is good. Okay. A virtue is something that we do habitually. Okay. Something that we enjoy doing. It's a passion. And it's a passion towards something that's good. It's when those passions start to drive our lives that they become obsessions, okay? Or they can become something even worse, and that they can become an addiction. Some people really like to eat. I love to eat. But if you eat too much or you eat the wrong kind of stuff, it can be extremely bad for you, right? Some people are adrenaline junkies, right? They like to go bungee jumping or parachuting out of airplanes. But if they can't continue to get that adrenaline, then they continue to do things that get them more and more adrenaline, and then they start doing things that are unsafe. So you can see how too much of this can be a bad thing. So when we start talking about virtues, remember that they're habitual. They're things that we do as a habit forming thing that are normally focused on the good, and they're good for us. And they give us this good disposition that we're doing good things. So having a passion for cooking is great because, one, you can become self-sufficient. You get to eat what you want because you can cook it. If you have a passion for basketball, then you can continue to play. That has all kinds of secondary benefits, both from a health standpoint, cardiovascular, all those other things. But you can also see where if we take it to an extreme, it can be bad. So when we talk now about morals and virtues, we have a basic understanding of what a virtue is and how it's driven by those determining things of right or wrong, our morals. So what might you think are what we call moral virtues? Now remember, we talked about morals and we talked about virtues. So what might you think, if we start putting those together, there might be? And I'll give you a hint. There's only 4 of them. Cardinal because they're directional. They guide our lives. No guesses. You're going to make me talk all night. Who has the stuff that Miss Diane sent out earlier today? Anybody got that handy? Can you read for me the sidebar? Anybody, the sidebar from UCAT 300 from St. Augustine? You're getting a pass today because you don't know how I operate. Okay, so I'll read it to you. To live well is nothing other than to love God with all one's heart, with all one's soul, and with all one's efforts. From this, it comes about that love is kept whole and uncorrupted through temperance. No misfortune can disturb it, and this is fortitude. It obeys only God, and this is justice, and is careful in discerning things, so as not to be surprised by deceit or trickery, and this is prudence. So who was listening? 4 cardinal virtues, 4 moral virtues. What are they? To live well is nothing other than to love God with all one's heart, with all one's soul, and with all one's efforts. From this, it comes about that love is kept whole and uncorrupted through temperance. No misfortune can disturb it, and this is fortitude. It obeys only God, and this is justice, and is careful in discerning things so as not to be surprised by deceit or trickery, and this is prudence. Okay, see some hands now. Katie?
Justice.
Give me one. Give me one.
Justice.
Justice. Robert?
Fortitude.
Fortitude. Thank you. Looking for hands.
Hannah
Anybody?
has her hand up.
Hannah, please.
Prudence.
Prudence. So that leaves 1. Of course, it was the first one, so that's the one you guys aren't going to remember, right?
Temperance.
Temperance. Thank you very much. Prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Okay, now you don't have this unless you have your Catechism of the Catholic Church out, but the official definitions for these things is that prudence is the virtue that disposes practical reason to discern true good in every circumstance and to choose the right means of achieving it. A prudent person looks where they are going. Prudence is right reason in action. How would you describe prudence? Anybody? Hannah? You got your hand up still. Is that an artifact? Or you going to answer me?
I can answer. Does it mean to like be cautious in a way?
In a way, actually, that's going to come a little bit later. But if you listen to what St. Thomas said in that first thing I read you, it is discerning, right? It is, in your words, being careful so that you do the right thing. Remember what it said. It is doing the right thing all the time. Now that would be perfect prudence, right? None of us are perfect. But it is a process. So yes, in a way, being careful about making good choices, right? Because we can be misled. Yes? Is that what you meant? How about justice? Justice is a moral virtue that consists in the constant and firm will to give their true due to God and to your neighbor. The just person, often mentioned in sacred scripture, is distinguished by habitual right thinking and uprightness of conduct toward their neighbor. So how would you describe justice? Nicholas?
Does it mean like owning up to your word or like self-righteousness?
Well, so self-righteousness is a little different than righteousness. Okay, sometimes self-righteousness is a bad thing because it's always inward focused. But righteousness means always doing the right thing, kind of even when nobody's looking, when nobody's watching. If you always do something good only when people are watching, then you have to ask the motivation. Why are you doing good? Is it because it's the right thing to do? Or because somebody's watching you and you want to give people a good impression? So there's a slight difference between self-righteousness and righteousness. But we talk about justice. How would you think of justice? What is justice? You hear a lot of talk about it in the news. You don't listen to the news? I don't blame you. It can be pretty depressing. Saw Stephen's hand go up and then come down immediately. Frank?
You said what justice is?
Yeah, we're talking about justice.
Like the right thing, like the best decision and things like that.
Who determines the best decision?
People.
That goes back to our morals discussion, right?
People.
Because our morals tend to lead us to what is good and what is bad, but then the virtue component tells us whether or not we've met a bar that we have arbitrarily set necessarily, that we are good or bad. There's all kinds of examples, right? White lies versus a lie. It's okay to tell a white lie, right? It's still a lie. So we've got this discussion about moral versus virtue, and now we're talking about moral virtues. So justice. The first thing I said was it is a constant and consistent. So let me ask this, and I'm going to throw this out there. So if you take offense, I apologize. Do we have a just society right now? Or have we? See a lot of left and right. So somebody tell me why you don't think it's just. You don't have to give an example. Just tell me why you don't think it's just. Frank was on to something here.
Priya has her hand up.
I'm sorry, Priya.
By not holding people to like the same standard.
So something now about everybody being consistent about how they apply something, huh? I would agree with that. Anybody else agree with that? I've already kind of poisoned the well here. So when we talk about justice, we are talking about a consistent, but I also said something else. Firm will. Is it easy to be just all the time? Why would it be hard to be just all the time? I'm not saying it's right or wrong. I'm just asking a question. Police officer, how many of you are driving age? Anybody driving age yet? Not yet? For future thought. Police officer pulls over somebody for speeding. Doesn't know the person. Person was speeding. He writes him a ticket. Is that just? Person was breaking the law. Police officer wrote the ticket. I would say yes, they were well within their rights to do that. Same police officer pulls somebody over and it's a friend that they know. So he lets them go. Is that just? That's a very simple discussion about this non-consistent application of justice. And we have all kinds of examples of that. And I don't even want to get into them. I mean, we could spend the entire evening just discussing justice, and we can pick any kind of justice, moral justice, racial justice, all of it. There should be one application, a consistent and firm application to give what is due to God and to neighbor. Okay? That is the virtue. That's the bar that we set. It's not necessarily just what we think. It's what we should do to give God, God's due, and our neighbor. Now, this is going to come in the last class. Anybody know where I'm going here? All right, we'll come back to this in the last class. So justice, habitual right thinking, and the uprightness of your conduct toward your neighbor. Okay? Applying the rules consistently. Okay? That is a moral teaching of the Catholic Church. A lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of the moral legal applications of the law come from Catholic moral teaching. Let's move on. Fortitude. Fortitude is a moral virtue that ensures firmness in difficulties and constancy in the pursuit of good. It strengthens our resolve to resist temptation and to overcome obstacles in moral life. So how would you explain fortitude to somebody? When I say you have fortitude, another way to think of it, we talked about application of justice as not always being easy, right? Yes? No? Application of justice is easy, right? No, we said it wasn't. We said the application of justice is sometimes hard. So how would fortitude impact the application of justice? Have you ever heard the statement, that person has the backbone of a worm? Does a worm have a backbone? No, a worm doesn't have a bone. It doesn't have a bone in its body, right? So it's very floppy, or you got a backbone like a wet noodle, right? So what would I mean by that if I said you have a backbone? You believe in something very strongly. Do you keep your mouth shut about it? No. What do?
You speak out and give your opinion.
You speak out. Now, why did you speak out?
Because maybe you know, like, what you think is right and you want people to hear it.
Right. So now you have the fortitude, you have the backbone to make a stand for something that you believe in. Okay? So do you see how these things kind of come together? We've talked about prudence. That's the ability to make decisions and lean toward good decisions all the time. We talked about justice and the application of it in a consistent and firm way. And then we could have in our own heart and mind the ability to discern right and wrong. And we could actually believe and have a good, firm, and willful foundation in what is just and right. But if I don't have the backbone to stand up and say or do something about it, is it going to happen? No. So there is your fortitude. So what's the last one? Temperance. Now, temperance is the moral virtue that helps us keep from going off the deep end. Okay? Anybody ever, I don't know, in a movie, in real life maybe, somebody is so caught up, so fired up about what they believe that they've gone way off the deep end? Anybody ever seen that? Temperance is the moral virtue that moderates the attraction of things. Temperance. Try not to be too selective here. A young child, okay? Young child gets their first taste of chocolate. You think it's probably a good experience for them? You think that? Yeah. And what happens if they just keep going after more and more and more chocolate, and they don't have any ability to control their desire for the chocolate? What's going to happen? What's the immediate thing that's going to happen? Gabby.
They're gonna get sick.
They're going to get sick, right? They're going to eat so much chocolate, they're going to get sick. So temperance is that ability, that moral virtue to moderate our attraction to things and gives us balance, okay? All of it created to good. So it ensures that we are masters over our instincts and our desires and not the other way around. So can you see how these four things come together? Can you see why they're called cardinal or moral virtues? Right? So let's go over them real quick. Give me one, anybody.
Fortitude.
Fortitude. And what is fortitude?
Like speaking out or like having courage to speak out.
Yes, having the courage to speak up. What's another one? Gabby.
Justice, to keep things consistent.
Justice. Very good. Who's another one?
Temperance, which is like balance of desires.
Outstanding. Thank you, Nicholas. What's left? It's really I won't say foundational, but it kind of starts everything. Prudence. Who can tell me what prudence is? You remember, it's that ability, practical reason to discern between right, between good. And we want to, in all circumstances, if we were perfect, we'd always achieve the good in it. That's prudence. Okay? Prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. Those are your four moral virtues, or your four moral virtues. We'll just leave it at that. I don't want to go to another name. Anybody got any questions about your moral virtues? Because I'm going to confuse you in a second, because we're going to change gears. No? We're good? You ready? So there are three theological virtues. Now, in the UCAT, I think they call them supernatural. But that's why I don't necessarily always like what the UCAT says, because the true term is theological. The theological virtues relate directly to God. They dispose Christians to live in a relationship with the Holy Trinity. And they have the one and triune God for their origin, their motive, and their object. That's a pretty heady definition, preface, if you will. But I don't think anybody's probably got a Bible handy. One of the things that Miss Diane sent out was a thing from 2 Corinthians. And you've all heard it. It's that you hear it at weddings a lot. You know, love is patient, love is kind, love is all those things, right? Anybody know what the very last sentence of that piece of the chapter is? You've all heard it, I guarantee you. Give you a hint, 2 Corinthians chapter 13. If I speak in human angelic tongues, but do not have love, I am a resounding gong or a clashing cymbal. And I have the gift of prophecy and can comprehend all mysteries and all knowledge. If I have all faith so as to move mountains, do not have love, I am nothing. Anybody ever heard this before? Yes? No? You haven't heard this? The last sentence. No, somebody's dying up there. So, at present I know partially, then I shall know fully, as I am fully known. So, faith, hope, and love remain. These three, but the greatest of these is love. You've never heard that before? So what do you think the three theological virtues are? I wouldn't have just read that to you for no reason.
Nick has a hand up.
Go ahead, Nick.
Faith, hope, and love.
Thank you. Now this is a little bit of a trick question, but what is another, if you think about this from a church perspective, what's another name? What else could you call love? Especially if you're doing it to somebody else, right? Maybe even a stranger.
I think Hannah has a hand up.
Hannah.
Charity.
Very good. Because see, we unfortunately, we hear that word love and we think of romantic love. And there are a whole lot of other definitions. Actually, the Greek language is much cleaner in its definitions because they actually have 4 words for love, depending upon the relationship. And the love that we're talking about here is the Greek word for agape, which is a charity. Great. So faith, hope, and charity. They are the three, they are the 3 theological virtues. Okay. The theological virtues are the foundation of Christian moral activity. Think about that. We just talked about our moral virtues, right? Prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. And now they are related, the foundation of those, because they're moral, they're things of us, are these 3 theological virtues: faith, hope, and charity. They inform and give all of our moral life its definition. They give us our moral virtues. So how would you explain that? Faith, hope, and charity in respect to prudence, justice, fortitude, and temperance. You got the 3 theological virtues, and above that, you got the 4 moral virtues. Think of them as kind of building blocks. If you have faith, what do you think faith gives you in respect to those 4 moral virtues? Maybe justice? You have faith that things are going to be equally applied? Yes? No? Too heady? The supernatural virtues are faith, hope, and charity. They are called supernatural because they have their foundation in God and directly relate to God, and are for us men and women the way by which we can reach God directly. If you have faith, you have hope, you have charity, how do you think that brings you closer to God? What's the opposite of hope?
Despair.
Thank you, Nikki. Despair.
I'm trying.
Despair. Complete lack of hope is despair. But what do we know? We know there's no reason for despair because we know how this whole thing ends. Thanks to Jesus. What about faith? What does faith give us that can help us? I mean, it's the logical answer, but I'm afraid people are just too afraid to say anything. How does faith get us closer to God? What is faith besides a theological virtue? What is faith Anybody? Give me a definition of faith.
Come on, you guys have had this.
I know,
since
Lily.
Your
You
first
raised your
day.
hand twice and put it down. No? What's faith? Come on. Faith is our response to whom? 3 letters, starts with a G.
God.
Thank you. Faith is our response to God. So what does faith, if we have faith, how does that get us closer to God? Go ahead, Nick.
Is it like us believing in God?
Well, it is us believing in God, but it's not just a belief. If we have faith, we don't just believe. We know, right? And we know because of why? Or should I say we know because of whom?
Jesus.
Jesus, his first and only begotten son, right? We just celebrated Christmas in his birth. This past weekend, we celebrated his baptism. Faith is our response to God. Faith in both God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, the Holy Trinity. Our belief gives us a foundation for something bigger than ourselves in a relationship with God. Hope. If we have hope, what do we have hope in? All of these things lead us back to God. Faith, hope, and charity, they lead us back to God. So if we have hope, what is it? How does it help us get closer to God? Anybody ever had a really, really bad day? Frank.
I kind of forgot what I was gonna say.
It's okay.
I had the idea, but I lost it.
All right, next time just jump right in. Anybody ever had a really, really bad day? Kind of day where you just want to kind of go and hide yourself in the covers. Yes, Ms. Nikki, I know. I almost feel like I'm having one now. Oh, I got Miss Diane down there waving.
Yeah. I've had a few.
Have any of you ever had a really, really bad day? Everybody? Come on. You had a really, I hate to use the word, but you had a day that just totally sucks, right? And you kind of just want to hide and just have the whole world disappear on you. When we have hope, what does that mean for us?
We know there's a reason to get up the next day.
We've got a reason. We have every reason in God, in Christ. Because here's something somewhat off track, but we're going to talk about it. I talked about Jesus' baptism. When Jesus was baptized, what did that do to us? What did that make us? It's a trick question. We became adopted brothers and sisters in Christ, in Jesus. Jesus became our brother. So what does that make us to God? If God is the Father, Jesus is the Son, and we are adopted brothers and sisters of Jesus, come on, do the genealogy. What does that make? What's our relationship to God? Stephen, I see your lips moving, but I don't hear you.
I was going to say, I think Priya has her hand up.
She's had her hand up. I'm trying to bring somebody else in. Thank you, Priya. Nobody? All right, Priya, bail them out.
Children of God.
We are adopted sons and daughters of God. So when you think about that relationship, faith, hope, charity, and we have this relationship with God and with Jesus, everything, if we're doing them according to those moral virtues that we just talked about, that all lead us back, then what is our relationship with God? Is it good or is it bad? I like Nicholas's answer there. Anybody? Good, bad, indifferent? If we live our lives by the moral virtues, founded in what we have for our theological virtues in our relationship with Jesus and with God, then our relationship with God the Father is good. We haven't damage that relationship. And that's going to come important later on when we start talking about what we're doing when we damage our relationship with God. Charity. Now, how would charity get us closer to God? How would charity, because God doesn't need anything from us, right? He'd like our love, but he doesn't need anything from us. We need him. So how would charity get us closer to God? Whatever you do to the least of my brethren, you do to me. Who said that? Jesus said that. So if we're being charitable, if we're doing those things out of good temperance, good judgment, prudence, and we're doing them for the sake of God and whom? Our, I'm boring somebody, neighbor. So who are we talking about? How does charity get us closer to God? Is it a good thing or a bad thing to do good things for our neighbors? It's a good thing. So I'm seeing thumbs up. So tell me, how does that get us closer to God? Gabby.
Because we're doing what he's telling us to do.
Doing what we're telling us to do, and that's true. Anybody ever heard of the book of Genesis? In the beginning, God created man and woman, right? And he created them what? He created them. Go ahead. I saw a hand go up.
Beautifully and wonderfully made.
Okay, Lauren, I agree. Beautifully and wonderfully. Everything that God made is beautiful and wonderful, is good. What else did he do? He made them equal. So this goes back to the justice component, believe it or not. And what else did he do? He made them in the image and the likeness of whom?
Himself.
Himself. We are made in the image and the likeness of God. So we should be able to see God in everybody we meet. We should be able to see Jesus in everybody we meet. So if we're doing charitable things for our neighbor, who else are we doing them to?
God.
God, to Jesus. That's how charity works in here. It's not hard. Faith, hope, and charity. Faith, hope, and love. Right? Love in the context of agape, being charity. Okay? Those are the foundations of all of our moral virtues, of all of our moral life. Okay? Everybody wipe your brow. That's one subject down. Hold on, everybody wipe your brow. Let it go. No? Wow. I even got some smiles, and I got some people just staring at me like I'm asleep. Everybody turn their head this way and that way. I want to make sure you're awake. There we go. All right, I see movement. Okay. Want to change gears? How much time we got? 8 o'clock, which means
Okay, so
we're
we're
over.
over
Yeah,
time.
if this is a good breaking point, I would suggest maybe do the grace next, I'm sorry, I should put do grace next week if you can.
Sure.
With sin and conscience.
Absolutely, we can. So folks, you know how I operate now. So hopefully next week we'll have a little more lively participation. And I do want to thank everybody that took the courage to raise a hand and to help answer. So everybody else, think about those moral virtues. We need to have a little bit of fortitude here. And I'm going to come back to this because these things all build on everything else that we're going to talk about. Okay? One other challenge for you as we get ready to leave tonight. If you have other questions, we have an agenda. We have some things that we're going to go over. But if you have a question, whether you put it in the chat or you want to ask it, I challenge you to bring it.